wars, geopolitics, world domination, religion, pipelines, terrorists, atrocity propaganda. Welcome to a fascinating episode of Geopolitics Demystified. Today we'll talk about Syria, everything you need to know about Syria and what you have not been told about Syria, or rather what you've been lied to about Syria. So we'll talk about the war, the civil war that has restarted, and we will go back to 2011. We'll talk about how it started, and then we will go back decades and even centuries and thousands of years to look at Syria's history and Syria's political system, the social system, the economy, everything you need to know about Syria. And these are all the stuff you will not learn from the mainstream media. Okay? But let's start with a recap of what is happening right now. The Syrian rebels, the so-called rebels, have captured the famous city of Aleppo, and then they're also going into Hama, another big city with a lot of historic relevance to the war. It's been like the hotbed of wars with the Muslim Brotherhood going back to decades. We'll talk about that. So, and this is just a continuation of the wars of Israel we've been seeing for the last more than 1 year, right? So Israel attacked Gaza first, and then a couple of months ago, it started attacking the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And then there was also some minor skirmishes with Iran, which fortunately did not turn out into be a huge regional war yet. And now what we're seeing in Syria is just a continuation of all these wars, you know. So this is the Israeli-American war against Palestinians, Yemen, Lebanon, Iran, and maybe even some in Iraq, and now a full-blown attempt to capture Syria and to do a regime change to get rid of President Assad. So this is really serious because Iran is not going to sit back and watch Syria fall into the hands of Israel and the US. Same with Russia. Russia is going to help a lot again. And in fact, it was Russia that saved Syria about a decade ago. In 2015, Russia really got involved with the Syrian war, and they saved Syria from turning into a huge, hub for the ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So we'll talk all about that, okay? So right now, what is happening is Turkey is playing a major role in sending in the rebels and sending in weapons and all that. So that's one part. But then the US and Israel are bombing Syria to make sure that Assad cannot fight back against these rebels, so-called rebels. They're all terrorists. They all belong to Al-Qaeda. We'll talk about that. So the so-called rebels or the moderate rebels, the militias, the fighters, these are all just nice names, propaganda terms for terrorists in Syria. So whenever they start to lose, then Israel and the US will bring in their planes to bomb the Syrian army, to bomb the Iranian militias. So, and if you look at the last 1 year, Israel has been bombing Syria almost every day. Okay, so just in the last year, Israel has bombed Syria 220 times in 365 days. Okay, so that's almost every day. And why? Because they wanted to soften up Syria so that the rebels can take over Syria. So this was attempted already from 2011 to about 2018, so for about 8 years, a lot of countries wasted a lot of money and time trying to get rid of Assad, and that did not happen. So now they're trying it one more time. What madness. So the big picture, okay, so let's start with the very, very big picture. What are the driving forces? There are two main driving forces and one smaller driving force, okay? So the first driving force is for the US and Israel to get rid of anyone in the region who doesn't bow to the imperialists and the Israelis. Okay, so that is the number one. And so Assad has been a stubborn person. He wants the Golan Heights back, which the Israelis captured and stole back in 1967 during the Six-Day War. And then Assad also supports Hezbollah and the Palestinians. So there's a lot of the animosity between Syria and Israel. So it goes back to the late 1940s, but it was rekindled in the last 2 decades. It became much more severe. And then, as General Wesley Clark famously said, how Pentagon, Donald Rumsfeld, and others, they wanted to conquer 7 countries in 5 years. So Syria was one of those 7 countries. So it's been targeted for a long, long time, and again, we'll go into more details. So that is the number one driving force, is to get rid of Assad so you can eliminate all oppositions to the US and Israel. Number 2 is pipeline. Okay, a lot of wars around the world are actually due to the energy resources, either to get hold of the energy resources or to transfer that energy, the oil, gas. And so a while back, like maybe 15 years ago, the US had a great plan to transport natural gas from Qatar to Europe. Okay, so it's like a long distance. So it has to go through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, and then to the rest of Europe. So it was the plan was going pretty well because Saudi Arabia was okay with that, Jordan was okay with that, and Turkey was obviously okay with that. The only country that said no or sort of no was Syria, because Syria had another plan. They had this plan with Iran. So they wanted to transfer the Iranian gas through pipelines that would come through Iraq and to Syria, into the seaport in Syria, and then from there to the rest of the world, like to Africa and to Europe. So that was the plan that Assad wanted to do. So then all these countries, they got together and they said, man, we have to get rid of Assad. So a whole bunch of countries ganged up on Syria. Okay. So you had from the West, it was basically the US was the mastermind, doing the organization and later on providing the arms to the Syrian rebels, and also doing training. The CIA spent like billions of dollars training stupid terrorists. And that was called the Operation Timber Sycamore. And so the US was the mastermind. And then the UK played a huge role in propaganda. So one of the British, the ex spy guy, he started the white helmets, right? Maybe you would have seen the documentary on Netflix. So that white helmets, pretending to save lives, are basically the Al Qaeda groups, and they were also trained in propaganda. So the UK specialized on that. And then France also got involved because Syria used to be a French colony for a short time between World War I and World War II. And so the French have a lot of connections. So what they did was to bribe some top Syrian officials. And these guys were flown to Paris, and then they acted in coordinating the civil war. So France also spent a lot of money in this civil war. So you have the US, UK, and France. And then you have obviously, the Israelis. So but Israel took an active part in all kinds of stuff, sending weapons, taking care of wounded the Al Qaeda soldiers. Netanyahu even went to a hospital to visit the wounded Al Qaeda terrorists who got wounded fighting the Syrian army. And the Mossad chief, in like an interview with Al Jazeera, he said, yeah, we support Al Qaeda because that group has not attacked Israel. So we have a different dealing with Al Qaeda. And he said that openly, quite shocking. So then you have Israel. And then Qatar played a huge role, obviously, because it was Qatar's pipeline. So Qatar had this massive center, like a huge building with communications and massive television screens showing maps and live maps of the war. And then in that center, you had CIA, Mossad, Pentagon, Turkish generals, Saudi generals, all these people, they got together and they were doing the organization. And this was also fully admitted by Qatar's, one of the emirs or prime ministers. He went on TV and he admitted to everything. But he did that in like 2019 or so when the war had failed, because then at that point, everybody was pointing fingers at one another. There's a famous video of Joe Biden putting all the blames on the allies. He said, hey, it was the Turks and the Saudis who funded the terrorists. He played as if he had nothing to do. As if the US had nothing to do with it. And he was the vice president when all this happened, during Barack Obama's administration. So that was that, So Qatar played a huge role in doing this war. And then you have Jordan and Turkey. So they both have borders with Syria. Jordan on the east side, southeast side, and Turkey in the northwest. So Jordan was the one who started the initial war in 2011. There was a small town, sorry, there's a small town named Daraa. So the US and others, they sneaked weapons from Jordan to Syria across the border, and they supplied all the guns. And that was where the first protest started, Daraa. And then it spread from there. So Jordan played a significant, but a sort of a minor role relative to Turkey. Turkey was the big kahuna. So, like, if you look at the percentage of weapons, probably 90% of all the weapons, and especially the large ones, they all flowed through Turkey. Okay, so like not just guns, but mortars, rockets, grenade launchers, tanks, all kinds of and then shoulder-powered missiles, all kinds of huge, very damaging, very dangerous weapons, all flowed through Turkey. And then Turkey also stole a lot of oil from Syria. And the ISIS guys at one point were selling like hundreds of tankers of oil, Syrian oil, to Turkey. And there were these massive lines of trucks just to brazenly, in the daytime, just to driving from Syria into Turkey, selling stuff, selling oil. And then it was stopped by Russia when Putin came in like 2016 or so. Putin ordered his fighter jets to bomb all these the ISIS oil tankers, and then everybody played dumb. Oh wow, we didn't know there were so many tanks, you know. So so that's that, So that was so we talked about how the U.S., UK, and France helped, and how Qatar helped, and how Jordan and Turkey helped, and then also we talked about the Israelis, how they helped, and then the last piece, but not the least, were the Saudis, because the Saudis, they helped with the ideology. Okay, so just like it happened in Afghanistan in the 1980s, the Saudis would send in the priests, and there was this one famous Saudi priest. I forgot his name. So he had a huge presence in Syria, and he had like millions and millions of dollars to spend every month to recruit all the jihadists and to brainwash them about how they should be ready to die in a war and be ready to be a suicide bomber and all this stuff, right? So this was the same principle used in Afghanistan. So these Saudis, they provided the ideology. The Americans, they provided the guns and the training. And the Turks, they provided the logistics. Qatar also provided the funding. The UK provided the propaganda. Now, do you see how it all worked? So it was like a massive project. So many countries trying to destroy one tiny country, Syria. It was just madness, And surprisingly, they all failed. All of them failed. So by 2017, when Trump came to office, he was really sick of this. He could clearly see what is happening. So he famously said that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton created the ISIS. Okay, and Trump had a general as an advisor. This was General Michael Flynn. Okay. And Michael Flynn was not just an ordinary general. What did he do? He was in Syria in 2011 and 2012, and he was the chief of the DIA in Pentagon. I think the DIA stands for Department of uh, Intelligence Agency. Okay, so he wrote a famous memo in 2012 saying to the Pentagon back in Washington, D.C., he said, hey, guys, we are supporting the Salafists, the Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Those are the three that make up the so-called Syrian rebels. And these people are not moderate, like the media calls them the moderate rebels. These are not moderates. And worse, most of them were not even Syrians. Okay. 100,000 plus terrorists from all over the world were flown into Syria. Okay. So they came from like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia basically sent a lot of their prisoners to Syria to go fight. They said, okay, you can either be in prison or go fight. And most people decided to go to Syria. And then you had volunteers from Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, Philippines, Indonesia. And then the US even took this chance to recruit Uyghurs from China, from Xinjiang region. So the Americans told the Uyghurs, hey guys, why don't you go fight in Syria for a couple of years? And then you will gain all the training you need, how to wage guerrilla warfare, how to use all the weapons, the grenade launchers and the mortars and the tanks and shoulder powered missiles and all that stuff. And then you can go back to China and you can fight China, and we will give you all the arms. So that was CIA's suggestion for the Uyghurs. So, like thousands of Uyghurs, about 10,000, flew into Syria. So they stayed in the border between Syria and Turkey. They kicked out the Syrians from their homes, and they just settled in. Okay, so back to the 2012 memo, General Michael Flynn, he wrote the memo in 2012 saying, guys, this is what is happening. We are supporting all the wrong people, the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda. And of course, the people in Washington, D.C. totally ignored it. And then later on, they fired or he resigned out of frustration. So then Trump had learned all these shenanigans from General Michael Flynn. And so that's why Trump did not want to get involved with Syria. So what happened within 3 months after Trump got into office, the CIA and Mossad and these terrorists in Syria, they staged a chemical weapon attack. It was a joke. And, if you see, there was like a small hole, like about 3 feet in diameter, maybe 6 inches deep. And that was supposed to be the massive chemical attack. And it was on like a forlorn road. Okay. And it happened at like 6 in the morning. It's not how chemical gas attacks happen. And then if you see the photo of the guy, it's a joke. There's a guy wearing sandals and he has his body totally exposed, his hair, most of the face is exposed, some of his the hands are exposed, and he's taking samples from the so-called sarin gas attack. Now, if it was really sarin gas attack, he would have died within a few minutes or within an hour. And then the BBC reporter, she goes there and she smells somebody's cloth. Okay, this is how BBC determines if there was a chemical attack or not. My God, just stupid beyond belief. So anyways, Trump had no stomach for these shenanigans, and he pretty much brought the war to an end. You know, so then all these countries, especially Saudi Arabia, realized their mistake. So Prince Salman then re-invited Syria back into the Arab League. So things were going so well. And then people were talking about how there could be China's Belt and Road Initiative, all the railways and the highways can come to Syria and make Syria great again. So there was a lot of hope. And President Assad went to Beijing. He had like an amazing reception in China. And the Chinese people loved him. There are like lots of great videos about his interaction with the Chinese people. So he's a very, very smart, very sophisticated man. He's very honest, and he's been doing the best for his country. But this is the ruthless geopolitics, how it can demonize anybody. And so by the way, this relationship between Syria and China is not just a new thing. It goes back literally 2,000 plus years. So back around when Jesus was born, or like maybe 100 years before that, so you had the ancient Silk Road. So for about 1,000 years, Chinese goods would come from China through Central Asia, through Iran, and it would come all the way up to Syria. And then from there, it would go to Africa and Europe. So this is really an amazing piece of history. Syria was an integral part of China's ancient Silk Road. And Syria's location is so strategic, right? It's like right in the Mediterranean. To the left is Europe. To the right is Asia. Down below is Africa. So it's just a very, very strategic place. And it was the same reason the Roman Empire actually captured Syria. And for a while, Syria was a very, very important part of the Roman Empire. So you can still see, like if you go to Palmyra in Syria, there are these amazing Roman colosseums and what used to be like a grand theater, a palace, a mansion, all those things, so they're kind of ruined, but you can still see like the major pieces are still there. And even in the current state, it's really amazing. It's sort of like as if you went to Greece, to the Parthenon or something. So it's so beautiful and magnificent. And another interesting part, historical fact about Syria is that Jesus actually practiced in Syria. He went to Syria and he preached. So, I think it was Peter. Yeah. Was Peter the first pope? Yeah. So Jesus appointed Peter as the first pope while he was in Syria. And then you have the famous biblical story about Saul, becoming blind on the way to Damascus. And then he finds God, and then he gets the eyesight back. And in Syria, you can find all these amazing monasteries and churches that were built around, like right after Jesus, like so maybe about 180, 150 AD. So the first generation of Christians didn't have a lot of money, so they didn't have political power. They were persecuted. They didn't have a lot of financial supporters, and these guys are all very poor. So they had to build these churches inside caves. It's really beautiful. And those are still around. And actually, Syria is so amazing that Damascus is one of the oldest cities in the world. So people have been continuously living in Damascus for 10,000 to 12,000 years. Imagine that. And one of the first writings, the alphabets in the world, the scripts are found in Syria. Like what is now, the Aleppo city, the famous city where there's a lot of fight between the rebels and the Syrian army. So right in Aleppo, they found these sort of cylinders with the alphabet. It's from like 2,500 BC or 2,500 years ago. I'm sorry, I forgot. But it's very, very old. One of the oldest manuscripts or the alphabets found in the world. So that's quite amazing. So Syria has a beautiful history, and it's a beautiful country. Uh, you know, uh, so they're now trying to demonize Assad. Okay, it's because they shoved all the good things about Syria down the memory hole. This is how nasty propaganda works in geopolitics. So, for example, um, there was an article in the Vogue magazine in 2011, I believe. So it was called "A Rose in the Desert." It was all about how wonderful the First Lady of Syria is. She was born and raised in the UK. She went to college and studied like computer science. And then she worked for one of the big banks like the Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan for some time. And then she met Assad, who was about to become the president of Syria. And they used to be boyfriend, girlfriend when Bashar Assad had no intention of going into politics. He was just a doctor. So he studied to become a doctor in Syria. He practiced his medicine in Syria for a couple of years. And then he moved to London to become like an ophthalmologist. And then that's when he met his future wife. So when she met him, she didn't know that he was going to be a president. And she was actually so thankful that he was not going to go into politics and he was going to stay in the UK and they were going to lead a normal life in London. So, but that all changed when Assad's brother, who was supposed to take the leadership from his father, the brother died. And then the father called Bashar Assad and he said, I need you. The country needs you. We need somebody like you, very smart, very progressive, very modern, and you can change Syria. So please come and get trained. So that's when Assad went back to Syria and he was trained for 6 years. So he had to learn everything about how Syrian politics works, Syrian military works, geopolitics, and all that stuff he had to learn to become a good president. So when the father died in 2000, that's when Bashar Assad became the president of Syria. Okay. And so he finally begged his wife, and then so she came to Syria, and she was loved by the Syrians. Well, she is still loved by the Syrians. And so this modern couple were very smart. They knew everything about economy, geopolitics, culture. And so Syria blossomed into this like amazing, peaceful, prosperous, secular nation. So you would have the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Alawites, the Jews, the Kurds, the Armenians. Everybody lived together in peace. Okay. So this was a wonderful situation. And there were even like, if you go back to the Western media, you can find the articles like how secularism in Syria is such a wonderful role model for the entire region, you know? And Assad was very popular. So a Zogby poll, a Zogby is like an American pollster. So Zogby poll conducted a poll in the Middle East, in the entire region, and they asked the people, apart from your leader, who do you admire the most in the Middle East, and plus in North Africa? And the number one leader was Bashar Assad. Assad was the most admired Arab leader in 2009, just like 1 year before the proxy war by all these other countries started. So, how sad. In 2010, the New York Times, the travel section, published an article on 10 best places to visit in the world. And guess which country came in those 10? It was Syria. Syria was one of the top 10 places to visit, recommended by the New York Times. Imagine that in 2010, because the New York Times editors at that time, they did not know that the US was planning a coup in Syria. So that's very sad. And even more, amazing is that France gave Assad the highest honor. It's called the Legion of Honor Award. This is like the highest civilian award that France can give. And they gave it to Assad. Okay. So now they're demonizing him as a brutal dictator, but he was once a friend of the West. Okay. Nancy Pelosi flew to Syria to meet with Assad. And, she traveled around Damascus, and she had a lot of positive things to say about Assad. How about the Queen of England? You can find photos of the Queen of England. This was when she was still alive. So the Queen of England schmoozed with Assad and his wife. The British prime ministers like Tony Blair, they loved Assad. And Pope John Paul II, he flew to Damascus. Okay, so he flew to Damascus to meet with Assad and to see all the Christian churches and monasteries and stuff. And by the way, here is like an amazing, amazing factoid. There's a place in Syria where they speak the language called Aramaic. That's the language spoken by Jesus. And it's the only place in the world that speaks Aramaic, the language of Jesus. And that's in Syria. And by the way, if you look at, I mean, if you talk to all the Christians in Syria, they love Assad because he protects them from the jihadists, from the Sunni violent extremists, the Salafists. These guys, these jihadists, these Sunni extremists, they kill Shiites and Christians in Syria. So so it's really sad, like they have murdered and raped nuns, they have beheaded priests, they drove tens of thousands of Christians out of their homes. So the US, NATO funded jihadists have been doing horrible things to Christians in Syria. And the person who is protecting those Christians is a Muslim, Assad. How crazy can the world be? You know? So, okay, so I've been on for about 40 minutes. And I can talk for like another 40 minutes. So let me wrap this up. If you guys really like this, then I can do a part 2 going more into the details of how the proxy war exactly happened. I can go into details of what happened in 2011, how Jake Sullivan sent an email saying the Al-Qaeda is with us in Syria, what happened in 2012, what happened in 2013, the rise of, the ISIS, and how the ISIS was funded and armed by the US, Israel, Saudis, and everyone. And we can go into 2014, the peak, and then 2015 when Russia got into the war, and then almost got into a war with Turkey. So there are so many fascinating things that happened between 2011 and 2018. So if you guys are interested, let me know in the comments section, and we'll do a follow-up to this. Okay. So, all right. Hope that helped. Please like and share the video, follow the channel, and share this with your friends. Thanks and have a wonderful week. Bye.